The goal of practicing Look at That is to change the dog's reaction to a particular trigger. The trigger could be the sight of another dog, a person on a bike, a moving vehicle, a squirrel, you name it. Instead of suppressing the behavior, we can change the behavior by addressing the underlying negative emotion which causes it. To start this exercise, click and treat each time your dog looks at the trigger. Feed them away from the trigger so that they don't continue to stare. It's a good idea to get some practice first with something that won't upset your dog. In this clip, I click as soon as my dog looks at the stacking ring toy and I feed her in a way that turns her head or body away from the toy. You can use the word yes instead of the clicker at any time. When you start practicing with the actual trigger, you won't really be able to expect your dog to turn around when they hear the click, and you might actually have to go to them to deliver the food and turn them around that way. You'll see that later on in this video. Here, I'm just turning her around so that you can see her in the camera, but you won't have to worry about that. When you start practicing with the real triggers, there are a few things to keep in mind. You'll need to stay far enough away from the trigger for your dog to stay calm and eat treats. If they're already overreacting, they're too close, and they're not in a good headspace for learning. If your dog starts to stare at the trigger or becomes tense, take that as a sign that they may be getting a little too close and you need to move away to continue the training session. There are two techniques you can use to move farther from the trigger without using force. Having to put a lot of tension in the leash can increase your dog's stress level in an already stressful situation. Put a U-turn on cue by backpedaling and saying "this way." Feed your dog when they begin to follow you. You'll notice I didn't put tension in her leash even though she didn't follow me. I just kind of waited and encouraged her to continue following me. And I'll just do this a couple more times to continue showing you what it looks like. You can incorporate the clicker into this exercise, but you don't have to. If you did, you would click as soon as they turn around and start following. You can also move your dog from point A to point B with a go find it exercise. To practice this, just toss a treat slightly ahead of your dog and say go find it. You can even toss a small handful to keep them busy for a moment. Practice both of these techniques at random times so that they don't always predict that a trigger might be approaching. Sometimes just getting out of there and finding an alternate route is the best course of action, and these techniques will help you with that as well. Now that you have your avoidance techniques and Look at That mechanics down, you're ready to start practicing with a real trigger. For the purposes of this video, the trigger will be a volunteer who Pidge knows very well. He'll be just off screen to the left. Although he wouldn't normally elicit a negative reaction from Pidge, you'll see that she's still getting a little excited, and I can use Look at That in the same way. You'll probably be enlisting the help of a volunteer to have the trigger in a certain location, which you can practice with, or you'll just be taking advantage of whatever triggers you see on a walk. Either way, you'll use those avoidance techniques to set up a scenario in which your dog can be successful. I'm careful to keep her far enough away from the trigger that her excitement doesn't overwhelm her, and she'd still rather eat treats. Still, I click and treat as soon as she glances in his direction. Notice that I'm turning her away from the trigger using food. If she were to get so excited by the trigger that she was not interested in eating, and wasn't able to look away from the trigger, then I would move away and create more space using a U-turn or go find it. The idea here is that with enough practice, the things that used to trigger your dog to bark, lunge, or pull will instead start triggering them to stay calm and check in with you to get a treat. Because this is not an overly exciting trigger for Pidge, I'm going to start waiting for her to glance back at me before I click. So the behavior becomes acknowledge the trigger, then disengage to get a treat. If she's tense or staring, I don't wait for this to happen. Instead, I just click when she looks at the trigger. It might be a while until you're ready to start waiting for this, and you'll notice that your dog is ready because they'll be so quickly looking away from the trigger. Even if it's going really well, keep the session short and end it on a good note. That way, they'll be even more excited to participate the next time.